Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the final and fifth meeting, combined meeting of the Building and Tenant Working Group. So glad you're here. We're just going to wait another couple minutes for folks to trickle in. If you're just joining us, if you have the opportunity, if you could just put your affiliation in your Zoom name. And we would also invite you, if you'd like, to put your pronouns in, and you can do that by clicking those three buttons in the upper right-hand corner of your picture. Okay, welcome. I see we've had a few people are continuing to join, so we'll just hold off starting this final combined meeting for another couple of minutes. And if you've just joined, I see a couple people without affiliations in their Zoom name. If you would be so kind as to just go to the upper right-hand corner of your picture, click those three dots, and then you can choose rename and make sure we all know kind of who you're speaking on behalf of in this group. And if you'd also would like to invite you to add your pronouns. We'll get started again. We will get started in, I want to say 1 to 2 minutes. Okay, I think we're close to being ready. I'd like to wait just 1 more minute. But thank you all for being here for this final combined meeting. If you have just joined in the last couple minutes, I was inviting everybody to add your affiliation to your Zoom name and your pronouns if you'd like. You're welcome to be on camera or not on camera as you prefer. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Vin, are you okay if we get going?
Or yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Marty.
Yep, no problem. Okay, hello, everybody. And I think this is my fourth welcome of the day, but really sincerely welcome and thank you for being here. This is the fifth and final meeting, and this is a really special meeting because we are a combined group today. So we are bringing together those of you who have been participating in the Buildings Working Group and in the Tenant Working Group for this final combined meeting. Thank you all for updating your Zoom names, and I want to invite you now to also put your name and affiliation and pronouns and anything else. If there's something else you'd like to add into the chat, so we have a running log in the chat of who is here. And I think it would be interesting if you would also like to, when you enter in the chat, let everybody know which group you participated in, the Buildings group or the Tenant group, or if you were in both groups. And then we have a sense of what everybody's perspective is. So as you're all doing that, I will let you know that the city is continuing to hold office hours. These are opportunities for you to come in and chat one-on-one with the folks who are working on this policy. I will go ahead and stick into the chat when those office hours are. But to let you know, they're Mondays and Thursdays. It's Monday afternoons and Thursday mornings for an hour. And those are running through the week of June 13th. Here you go. And so if there are other things you want to talk about, questions you want to ask, or things you want to provide input on, this is the time. Those office hours are the time to do that. So I see everyone entering their information into the chat. Thank you very much for doing that. So before we launch in for today, and even before I provide you an overview of what we're going to do today, we wanted to really focus in on where we've come from. And so Irene, Kim, and I are going to do a high-level overview of the discussion topics that we have covered in these groups and provide you some of our takeaways of things that we have heard. So Irene, I will welcome you up to the virtual stage. Thanks. You want to get us started with this?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Marty. Okay, so I just shared my screen. Can everyone see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, great. Yes, Marty and I will both be giving a recap of all the 4 previous meetings we've had with the building working group and the tenant working group. And the topics that we covered in those meetings are just around more high-level values from each of those groups. And then we also covered equitable energy standards, health and resilience standards, and then the implementation of those standards. So we'll be kind of giving a recap of what we talked about on each of these topics. So the first topic was on values, and I just wanted to share, we did a Wordle exercise on using Mentimeter, so kind of a live polling exercise to understand or get your sense of what values you think are important to bring to the HEART standard. So just want to share that we found lots of similarities between the tenant working group and the building working group. So I'll just kind of toggle back and forth between the building working group and tenant working group. Things like health, equity, community, affordability, resilience were all common sort of values that came up with this question, which was great to see. And then in the second topic, we talked about equitable energy standards. So I'll start with sort of the tenant working group recap, and I'll turn over to Marty for the building working group recap for the rest of the remaining 3 topics here. So for the equitable energy standards, the tenant working group, the key takeaways from this from that meeting was we talked about some desired characteristics of energy sources. So we heard that there is a desire for a more comprehensive understanding of pros and cons of different renewable sources, having access to diversified mix of energy sources, especially during emergencies, and then focusing on how renewable energy can help generate wealth and ownership in lower income communities. So not just, how can we help save costs and make those improvements, but how can that generate wealth for folks? And then we also talked about energy use and utility bill cost information. So what do people really need to know and be aware of around energy use and utility bills? So there were, we heard that requiring regular audits that are publicly accessible and clearly displayed with also with accountability measures. Having mutual understanding of tenant and property owner rights and responsibilities, and then also a desire for better community partnerships and relationship building, because this is very critical in building trust and awareness of these different issues, tools, and resources that are available. And then I'll pass it to Marty to talk about the building working group.
Thanks, Irene. And I think, hearing you talk about the tenant working group, I think we see a lot of similarities across the interests of these 2 groups. So in the buildings working group on this topic, we did spend a bit of time talking about the overall policy design. as the folks from the Institute for Market Transformation, the kind of national group who is advising multiple governments on these issues, presented to us, there are different ways that these types of policies can be designed. And so some of the priorities that we heard from folks, first was the stress on the importance of flexibility. This understanding that buildings are going to be different, even buildings of the same type are going to be at different places in their life cycle, especially for particular systems at different times. And there's a desire for a flexible policy that can accommodate those differences. We also heard about all different types of support that building owners would appreciate having in helping them comply with the policy. And we're going to get the chance to talk a little bit more about those types of support that are needed this afternoon as well. And then finally, we heard about this, I would describe it as really a balancing act that people talked about with regard to both wanting emissions reductions and improvements in air quality quickly, right? Not wanting to put those off, but also understanding that, for example, a building that has just recently upgraded a major system, it doesn't seem practical to ask that building to remove and replace something that is essentially brand new. And on the side of renewable energy, here, I think, is where we really see a lot of the similarities with the Tenant working group. So lots of concerns, right? Concerns about what the impact will be on cost, whether renewable sources are reliable, and then other potentially negative impacts of renewable sources. And then very much like what we heard in the Tenant working group, a strong preference for renewable generation that is local, as opposed to obtaining credits for that renewable generation that may be occurring elsewhere in the state or even in other states. And then also, I think, contributing both to workforce development and wealth creation is the opportunity for community-owned renewable generation. I'll pass back to you, Irene, for our next topic.
Great, thanks. Okay, so moving on to topic 3, which was around health and resilience standards. So in the Tenant working group, we asked about, some preferences around, whether there should be one cooled room or whether day or night is preferred, offsite cooling centers, things like that. So we've heard a strong preference for at least one cooled room per household, both day and night. Obviously, because during the evenings, at least during the heat dome, night times are also pretty hot, and so that was a preference that we heard. Providing prioritizing offsite cooling centers as well, but also providing wraparound services at those locations, such as childcare, healthcare, workforce services, was also an idea that came up. And then, many were also unaware of the tools available to improve indoor air quality. So we heard from folks that more information is power. So having tools available for tenants to really help them sort of have a better understanding of what to look for in a building, understanding building conditions and utility costs, what to ask landlords about, things like that before signing a lease. So we heard ideas about having, something like an easy checklist for renters to kind of look through as they are looking for apartments. And also a strong emphasis on really the need for incentivizing and financial support to make these improvements. So we really heard that that people are really weighing decisions between whether they should pay higher utility bills during like the heat dome events, for instance, or wildfires and things like that, and between that and their own health and well-being. So having that incentive and financial support is really critical for our most vulnerable populations. And then I'll turn over to Marty to talk about the building working group.
Thanks. So here again, I think we heard really overlapping and consistent priorities between the two groups. So continuing on that theme, when it came to temperature standards, I'm going to take the second and third bullets first because they are directly aligned with the tenant working group. Again, strong preference for in-home cooling over centralized cooling shelters. And there were a lot of reasons for this, most of which Irene touched on. I will also add the mobility challenges that many folks emphasized that were a real perceived negative of a centralized cooling shelter. And then again, just reiterating the importance of information and the power of information. And so we heard in the buildings working group a couple of really fantastic examples of owners of multifamily buildings providing that type of education to the occupants of their buildings. In the buildings working group, we also talked about how that in-home cooling could be accomplished. And I wanted to acknowledge the really wide range of possible improvements that were discussed and emphasize that these things can be accomplished in a number of ways that vary greatly in their cost, from very low cost to very high cost, and in the invasiveness as far as how it impacts the occupants of those buildings, right? From things that an occupant might barely notice at all to things that might be more disruptive to them. When it came from air quality, again, we heard very similar things. So first and foremost, that was, I think, a key takeaway for us was the importance of more information about opportunities to improve air quality and things that negatively impact air quality. So I think, for example, many of us in these sessions were surprised to learn that we should be running our vent hoods if we have a natural gas powered stove, that we should be running that vent hood for several minutes after we're done cooking, just as one example. We also talked quite a bit about this, again, a conflict or a tension between increasing ventilation and its impacts on potentially increasing energy use. We also talked about the challenges of increased ventilation when our outdoor air quality is poor. And finally, as in the tenant working group, we talked about the desire and some opportunities for supporting the financial burden of making these types of improvements to buildings.
So then in our fourth topic, we talked about implementation of standards. And this one, because Marty was out with COVID, so I ended up facilitating both the building working group and tenant working group. So I'll cover both of those today. So in the tenant working group, we wanted to kind of hear ideas about how we can implement these standards without passing on cost to renters. So we know that this is a big concern for lots of folks in both groups around anti-displacement and passing on costs to renters. So the ideas that we heard was that, what we heard was that there was lots of concern about property owners raising rents, even with these incentives and financial support provided. So finding creative ways to maybe attach strings to really ensure that savings and benefits are really spread to both owners and renters. And then there also, we also heard ideas about programs that can help renters become owners. So kind of thinking about whether it's first or right refusal or things like those types of mechanisms to provide opportunities for renters to have ownership. We also asked about the split incentive solutions or solutions to kind of address split incentives. So some ideas we heard around that were to incentivize owners from a business perspective. So I think a strong thing that we heard was that any incentives and financial support or things like that really need to prioritize owner or property owners, and so that and in order for owners to feel like they can not pass those on to renters. So, and also we heard ideas about better relationships and aligned interests between renters and owners as well to really address split incentives. We also did a kind of an interactive exercise around prioritization of implementing standards. So we had these 4 buckets of categories: indoor air quality, carbon emission reductions, maximizing indoor temperature, and community-based energy. So we had people, their icons attached to all of these different categories, and had people sort of put these icons in this timeline. That's what you're seeing in this graphic here. So 2024 was for indoor air quality, folks prioritized that in 2024, and then carbon emission reductions, and then maximum indoor temperature. And community-based energy was sort of a bit scattered between 2026 and later. So this is kind of wanted to give you a sense of where things landed in terms of priority for folks in the tenant working group. In the building working group, we also asked the same question around implementation without passing costs on to renters. So some ideas that we heard was really incentivizing early action and promoting benefits of early action for long-term gain, because I think, you know, these early actions, it's helping owners understand that even with these early actions that they won't be able to see benefits instantly. So really promoting that those benefits can really help with long-term gain. Also, ideas about expediting and waiving permitting fees, system development charges, property tax reductions, where we heard multiple times. And then also leveraging PSEF funds to take action more quickly and support residents at risk of displacement. And then we also heard about, you know, that Portland can really be a great model for a local solution to meet our targets, but also that statewide and federal intervention can be much more meaningful. And then phasing in multifamily buildings later and being mindful of the time it takes for property owners to make these improvements is also something we heard. So that's a very quick recap of all the you know 8 or so meetings that we did over the past several weeks. Again, all of the meetings were recorded, so you can check those out again on the YouTube link that Wing just provided in the chat. So feel free to check those out to catch up on anything. And with that, I will turn it back over to Marty.
Thanks, Irene. And, you know, as we were both talking, I was thinking that, you know, these are takeaways from Irene and I and those of us who have been organizing these meetings. And I wanted to acknowledge that this is somewhat subjective. So if you have a key takeaway or something that you didn't hear represented in the recap that we just gave, I wanted to invite you to enter that in the chat. You're welcome to share that with everyone. You're also welcome to share it privately with myself or one of the other city staff. But if there's something that you think was really important that came out of these meetings that we have not spoken to, please go ahead and share that with us now.
I'll also note, thank you both for taking a lot of information and synthesizing in a way that we get a sense for what was discussed between the 2 working groups. And I want to note that the month of June, the city will be digesting a lot of information from all of our notes from our breakout rooms, from our large group discussions, from the chat, and putting that together into a summary. And so if you're not seeing a lot of detail here on your specific key takeaways too, there will be a lot more analysis by the city. But this is so helpful, Marty and Irene, to really introduce what was discussed at the between the 2 working groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Vin. Okay, so today, the agenda for today is going to follow a very familiar format from the previous meetings that you all have attended. So you see it here. I've also just put the high-level outline into the chat. So we have 2 primary topics for discussion today. That's number 3 and number 5. So workforce development and resource hubs. Unlike in some of our previous meetings, today we're only going to break out into small groups once. That's agenda item number 6. That's going to be towards the end of our session. And we're going to start today actually with number 2 on the agenda with a little bit of follow-up on some of the open questions that that we didn't get a chance to tie up and respond to in previous meetings. So with that, I will remind you of the Zoom etiquette, which no doubt you have memorized at this point. We'll ask you all to please stay muted unless you're in a small group or unless we're having a large group discussion. And if you have any particularly harsh background noise going on, I'll invite you to hide your own image if you'd like, using those 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. Just reduces cognitive load. I'll suggest that you put your other devices, your phones or tablets, as well as your desktop computers on Do Not Disturb to avoid disruptions. If you need tech support, please private message Wing. And also invite you to use the chat and use any of the reactions at any point if you would like to respond to what you're hearing or pose questions. We are monitoring the chat. Okay, with that, we will get started, and I will turn over the floor back to Irene for an introductory activity where we will attempt to simulate an in-person meeting.
Right, so let me get situated here. So just a reminder to please enter your names and pronouns and affiliation in your participants list, or you can also add it in the chat. So we'd like to introduce do a little kind of get to know each other a little bit. I know this is a big group, but we wanted to give everybody at least one opportunity to get to know 1 or 2 people. So we're going to break out into breakout rooms really quickly. And then I'd like you to answer a non-work related question, since we're probably very busy and would love to take a break from our work. So the icebreaker question is, what are you looking forward to this summer? So we'll go into breakout rooms, get to know each other a little bit. And if you could share your names, pronouns, your organization, or whoever you're affiliated with, and then talk about what you're looking forward to this summer. So Wing is going to open up those chat rooms here.
Hi, Wing. I'm so sorry. I accidentally left my room.
Oh, that's okay. I think everything's good. It was a really short period.
Yeah, they popped us into another room. Okay. So while more people are coming in, I could go ahead. I'm Gail Palmer with the she/her with the East Portland Resilience Coalition. That's a group of organizations, 20 organizations who work with neighborhoods and families east of 205. So we're out here in the far east part of the city, and I am looking forward this summer to actually flying to visit some of my sisters. I have sisters all over the country, big family. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. How about you, Jordan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Salcido. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Environmental Justice Fellow with Coalition of Communities of Color. And Gail, I noticed your prints on your wall, and I actually just bought the same print at the Goodwill the other day, and I just put it up. So yeah, it looks familiar. And I'm looking forward to think, yeah, just like the normal summer things that, like maybe being outside, going swimming, going to the beach, maybe just, yeah, spending some time outside while also staying cool. And yeah, just enjoying that time with my son. I don't know if you went yet, Marley?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wendy, I was just saying, I know some not-for-profits that would love that. If you could send it to me, thank you.
Will do.
Great. Well, it sounds like there's some networking happening. I got to know Marty a little bit more and also did some networking and business development. So that's great. Well, hopefully you all had a chance to get to know each other a little bit. So with that, I will hand it off to Vinh to get us started here.
I need to come off mute before I do that. All right, thank you, Irene. I really appreciate that. It's funny that it sounds like you randomly ended up with Marty. I had a great random connection. So I'm sorry we couldn't meet in person. Like you all know at the beginning, I was like, well, yeah, pending COVID, let's all get together in person, and it'd be a great chance for folks in the building working group and tenant working group that might not normally overlap to have just some informal time. So at least we did a little bit of that. I wish we could have shared a meal together too. Okay, I'm going to share screen here. All right, here we go. Our last meeting together as working groups. I don't know, potentially, I know that at least one city came back and re-engaged the working groups later on. That could happen, but for now, this is it. And so thank you everyone who's here. I think I just counted, we're close to 80 folks in the room, and I really appreciate your time as we wrap it up here. So I will be sharing initially, as noted in the agenda, some follow-up from our last two meetings. We didn't quite land in the same places from the working group meetings, and there were some outstanding questions that I tried to address. So I'll cover a little bit of that, and then we'll move on to the two main topics, including workforce development, where Dirk Larson will be sharing a bit. He's the buildings program coordinator here at BPS and has been helping out along the way. He's going to share a little bit on workforce development, and then we have 3 guest speakers for you. And then the other main topic is we're also going to cover resource hubs, referring to, that's the term that's used in other cities with building performance standards. We're inviting Zach Hart back, our Institute of Market Transformation partner, who can share what's happening in other cities. He'll share a little bit in the implementation side too. Okay, so revisiting we covered 3 different areas, covered buildings, compliance cycles, enforcement. We really didn't talk about enforcement in the building working group, so we'll get there today. But I wanted to revisit covered buildings for a minute. In the building working group, we looked at some high-level data on the emissions per kind of different sizes of buildings, and there were a couple of comments in there. One, can we look at this for commercial and multifamily breakdown? And there was another question that came up that was, if we reduce the building's threshold size from 20,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet, how does that make a change in emissions? Or maybe it was more like what gets us to 75%. And I was thinking of commercial and multifamily, but this chart on the left includes single family too. So 189,745 buildings under 20,000 square feet. That does include single family. And so when we look at it through that lens, it's quite a different number. So I thought it'd be good for you all to have an analysis of the raw data here. I'm not going to go through the entire table, but there it is, and it will be sent out as part of the PDF. But I will note one thing is that single family on its own is 28% of the emissions. So right there, that's we're not covering that in this policy. And then if we were to look at the overall building sector, if we reduced from 20,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet, that would result in a 7% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions versus the 50% that we get at 20,000 square feet and over. it does add another 3,161 commercial multifamily buildings, and that's based on 2017. So we might as well say that's 3,200 buildings. Then so nearly doubles the number of buildings we would have to cover and administer a program for another only 7%. So I thought I would point that out as a high-level overview. Okay, and then another area I wanted to revisit is on compliance cycles. There was a chart that I had shared, and I did include this in the PDF yesterday, that as Zach noted, who presented this, that's the wrong slide. So I wanted to show you the other slide, which is very relevant to a building working group meeting number 2 comment that we had of what about folks that are on compliance cycles that don't quite, or sorry, on operations and maintenance cycles that don't match up with a linear progress on carbon emissions or energy use reduction down to 0 by 2050. So this example is one we did share, and it's in both groups, and that's the progress made over time, and some ideas of if just looking on the energy efficiency side, some ideas on how to reach the targets. So the kind of the low-hanging fruit of replace the lighting, make sure it's LED, doing some building tune-ups. We're going to hear later about the green janitor program and how the initial standards targets could probably be met just by for commercial buildings by green janitor program. And then planning ahead for an envelope upgrade. So thinking about windows, adding, replacing windows, updating insulation. And then further out, another way to do a deeper energy retrofit is to look at mechanical upgrades. So go to the next slide here. This is the one I wanted to share. Is that we can also develop alternate compliance options. We see this in other cities like Denver, where, as noted, if there is an operation maintenance cycle that's already in place for a mechanical system that is due to be replaced at some point in the future, like for how does this affect someone who just updated their mechanical system? So we could look further out and doesn't have to meet the target exactly, but need to commit to eventually meeting it once those upgrades are met. So we call that an alternate compliance option. I think that would address that concern. Okay, I do want to note though, real quick again, that energy efficiency is one pathway, or conservation, like with the green janitor program, is one pathway to meeting a carbon emission standard. The other is renewable energy. So it's possible just to use renewable energy. It could cost more though. So for a lot of buildings that are not energy efficient, it will make more sense to make some energy efficiency investments and then invest into renewable energy. So I think most buildings would be looking at a mix of both options in the future. Okay, and Irene touched on this from the tenant working group, and I wanted to highlight a couple other key ideas in here. That I realized going through this exercise that we had is that there is this emphasis on indoor air quality, and we do have some indoor air quality standards right now at the city. So I wanted to review those in the next couple slides. We also have a temperature standard at the city. So one thing we could do is phase in these two aspects of the standards within the existing process as a potential option. So we'll be looking to coordinate with the Bureau of Development Services on that later this summer. And then the carbon dioxide emissions reduction, that's a starting point. So it's like, when do we start? And you heard the priority for commercial first and then multifamily. And that works out well because we have a commercial baseline. For multifamily, we don't have that baseline yet. So really that would need to be established first. And then so the carbon emission standards could be implemented after that. There is one other thing. Oh, yes. And then Irene noted like, it looks like a 2027, 2028 kind of time frame for the temperature standards. So I thought it was really interesting to see that there was one person on the left here who was like, we just had this heat dome and people died. We need to do something right away. And so, but otherwise, I thought it was interesting to see like that's a priority that came after carbon emission reduction. I wanted to note that fits in really well with the other efforts at the city. So the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management and Multnomah County Health Department are working on near-term solutions because of the heat dome, and that's active right now. And acknowledging that that is outside of the home, but still there is action that's happening. Some of that work is piloting in-home with regulated affordable housing as well, so we can learn from that process. One other thing to consider that at the city is we have the Portland Clean Energy Fund heat response. So that's being rolled out with, I believe it's 7 community partners right now and expanding, the 3 community-based organizations for affordable housing providers. And they're looking at distributing, starting actually this month, they're starting to install portable heat pumps for tenants. So, and it's going to be 15,000 units over 5 years. That puts us right at 2027, 2028. So now the tenants would be given these portable units for immediate response through PSEF, the Portland Clean Energy and Community Benefits Fund. But then with these standards, for the actual property to provide cooling within the home, that would be timed perfectly, really, with this priority as PSEF wraps up. And I'm sure that our other work that's happening through Portland Bureau of Emergency Management and Multnomah County Health Department will be well underway by then. Okay, so just wanted to share a bit on that, since the building working group had not seen this, and there were some additional wheels turning after our last meeting. Okay, and then on enforcement, there were some discussions around inspections for the tenant working group, and so we got some great feedback and ideas around that. But we didn't get to penalties, and that we didn't get to either of those for the building working group. So I just wanted to share, I know the tenant working group has already seen this, that the standards that we do have at the city right now for rental housing is there is an indoor air quality standard, and it's to make sure there's working carbon monoxide and smoke alarms. There is a minimum temperature standard for heat without portable devices at the city, and that heating and ventilation equipment is free from leaks. And then the city does already do quite a bit around mold. So these last 4 are really kind of keeping moisture and the rain out to reduce the accumulation of mold. So those standards are there. There's a lot more to these standards. These are the ones I saw kind of intersectional with our work. There is another chapter 35 that's on commercial buildings. Its focus is on the bottom 4, though, rather than the more kind of general housing focus of the first 3. Okay, so whether it's Title 29 for rental housing requirements or for commercial buildings, there is a Chapter 60 on administration enforcement that happens to the Bureau of Development Services. And they have a complaint-based system for inspections. We heard from Beth Benton, who manages that program for the Bureau of Development Services and the Tenant Working Group, that there is a process starting this July on looking at that inspections program and looking to improve on that. So there's a good opportunity to coordinate with that bureau here in the near-term future. They also already have enforcement of penalties for noncompliance. There are monthly enforcement fees that are increased for multiple months of noncompliance. So then so for health and temperature standards, there's already a system that I think that we can expand, or at least consider proposing to expand. For carbon standards, we wanted to look at a few other cities. First, I just wanted to highlight one from Denver that I mentioned earlier. This slide was in the tenant working group slide deck, and we didn't quite get there, but it's just to note that the fines associated with carbon standards in other cities are really looking at the cost of energy efficiency improvements and renewable energy, and making sure that the cost of non-compliance is similar to that cost, so that folks aren't simply taking the penalty instead of making the improvements, and a concern that penalty might actually be passed along a higher rent too. Some high-level ideas that came out of Denver are that the fines and how they're set, and that the fine should be higher for the alternate compliance options. The folks who are asking for an extension because they're going to make a larger investment down the road, if they don't meet that, to increase the fines for them. And then looking at mechanisms to ensure that, sorry, I can't quite see that new owners know the compliance status and obligation, and that they know what the alternate timelines are ahead of time. So those are some high-level ideas out of Denver. I want to dive a little bit into the weeds. Actually, I won't dive into it. I want to invite Zach Hart from the Institute of Market Transformation to dive a little more in the weeds into Denver, but also the other cities. There are many other cities, right? At this point, we have 6. There's another 30 in the queue, including Portland. They're developing building performance standards. But to invite Zach to talk a little more in detail what those penalty structures kind of look like. This isn't something that the city is going to determine anytime too soon, but we want to know what the options are out there. So Zach, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Thanks, Vin. So this chart shows 8 of the 10 jurisdictions that have building performance standard laws, enforcement measures. The 2 that I don't have, those are still to be determined, so I left them off. But before I go into this, just wanted to kind of reiterate the idea that Vin just shared from on the Denver slide of setting these enforcement measures or penalties high enough that they incentivize compliance with the law by improving buildings. That's ultimately what our goal is, and that's what we want to see. So that's kind of an overarching principle that many jurisdictions took into determining their penalties. That said, the way that government enforces a building performance standard law is subject to the kind of civil penalty structure that is in place in that jurisdiction, which may or may not be within the control of the department within the department implementing the building performance standard. It may depend on state law. So there's a number of factors that kind of may reduce the flexibility of a city to set the penalties exactly where they would be. And so we'll talk about, or I'll show you what that kind of looks like in some of these jurisdictions. There's kind of, I guess there's broadly 2 approaches here to setting enforcement or penalties for building performance standards. You'll see some jurisdictions set the penalty on a per unit basis of carbon or energy, whatever the performance metric in question is for the policy. Per unit that you're over the standard or that you don't meet the standard, you'll be assigned a penalty. And then the other approach is per violation. And this has to do often with the way that the civil penalty legal framework is structured in a location. But per violation, you didn't meet your standard, that is considered a violation, and there is a civil penalty associated with that. So for example, look at Colorado, civil penalty of up to $2,000 for a first violation of the performance standard and up to $5,000 for each subsequent violation. Washington State, $5,000 plus an amount not to exceed $1 per square foot per day based on the duration of any continuing violation. So what you see is places where they have this per violation penalty structure, they're able to make that more expensive by accruing the penalty over a number of days or months that the building is not in compliance. So that's how they kind of make up for the relatively low penalty structure. I mean, $2,000 for a violation is not very much when we're talking about improving a 150,000 square foot building. But because they can accrue those penalties, they're able to make up for that. And then the other approach on a per unit basis of carbon or energy, let's look at Boston. They use the term alternative compliance payments, which they've set at $234 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent. So that the key word there is it's an alternative compliance payment rather than a penalty. So a building owner can pay this for every unit of carbon, every metric ton of carbon that they are over the emissions limit for their building. And they'll remain in compliance, but it'll be expensive because Boston has calculated the penalty to be on average more expensive than taking other strategies like energy efficiency or renewable energy. Now, if a building doesn't pay the alternative compliance payment, then they would go into a penalty structure where Boston would assess daily fines of up to $1,000 for the larger buildings and a little bit lower for the medium-sized buildings. And there's no cap on that. So that could go up to a very expensive total. And then also taking that approach, New York, there's a similar approach, New York City, $268 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent over the limit. For cities that use energy as the basis of their performance standards, you can see Denver and Washington, D.C., they have max penalties set on, in Denver on a per KBTU basis. So up to 70 cents per KBTU over the standard. There's some latitude there that the city can use to determine what the actual penalty might be. And then in DC, they have a max compliance penalty of $10 per square foot, and there's some leeway there, and they have a number of different compliance paths in DC that they have formulas for to calculate a building's ultimate penalty. But that gives you an overview. I know it's a lot of information. You'll have, you can look at this slide and kind of delve into the details more if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll share the slide deck out later as usual. So thank you, Zach, for taking us into an overview for you, a bit of the weeds for us.
So I want to open up the floor. Vin, I think we can just take 1 or 2 minutes, if that's okay. Are there any clarifying questions, technical questions, things you didn't understand, questions you had that didn't get answered? I will invite you to put that into the chat, or if you'd like to go ahead and raise your hand, and then we will call on people one by one if you wanted to share your question out loud.
I just want to share an exciting comment from the chat that the first cooling unit gets installed tomorrow for the heat program.
Thanks, Dirk. Okay. Last call for questions, clarifying questions on the information you just heard on buildings, covered buildings, compliance cycles, enforcement penalties.
Oh, then are we moving on to our next block? Where are we at?
Yep. I'm sorry. Yes, we had a question in at the last minute. Thank you for this question. What is the typical city bureau or agency that would enforce these penalties?
In Portland, it's the Bureau of Development Services. So like for the commercial energy reporting, we follow their schedule and fees that's approved through City Council. But Zach, do you want to share any insight to that?
I can say that typically you'll find kind of an analog to your BPS. So the sustainability department or resilience department implementing the policy, and then similarly following along the kind of city civil penalty structure that's in place.
All right, thank you.
Well, Vin, I think it's back to you again for the kind of first major content block of our day today on workforce development.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so here we go. We're working on this proposal. Let's say that it gets it goes through City Council, and then we're implementing it. There's going to be a lot of new jobs to try to meet these standards with improving air quality, meeting the temperature standard, but also over time meeting the carbon standard, whether those are jobs within increasing renewable energy or adding on energy efficiency to buildings. We expect to have a growth in the workforce that is not just clean energy workforce, but also health and temperature kind of solutions. So with that said, we wanted to share some considerations along the way. One is an example that's already happening, as noted. Dirk, thanks for noting. I'm going to turn it over to you first, but to do an overview. So Portland Clean Energy and Community Benefits Fund, PCEF. Dirk is our lead on workforce development, and we met with labor unions and trades last week. And so I'll turn it over to Dirk just to do an overview of what's happening with PCEF, maybe for some inspiration. I hope that there's a lot of inspiration today. And then we'll hear from Jeremy Seimer, who leads the Green Janitor Program for SEIU Local 49. And that is a program that's been established in Los Angeles, and Jeremy is active in growing or establishing it here and growing it significantly in the near term. And then we'll hear from James Matoir from Earth Advantage, and James is a specialist in workforce development and green jobs, and will talk to us about building a green construction workforce in the future and how to start building that pipeline for BIPOC communities. And then we'll end with the Blue Green Alliance, Renfis de la Toro, who has been working in Portland although also works nationally, has been working in Oregon and specifically in Portland for quite a long time. Both James and Renfis have been advisors to Build Shift along the way. Renfis is a workforce development green jobs expert. and will talk to us about what's currently happening and where he sees things going in the future. So we're looking forward to hearing from you all. Dirk, I'm going to turn it over to you first. One thing I'll note is that all three of our guest speakers are also connected to the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So take it away, Dirk.
Sure, thanks, Vinh. Yeah, so Portland Clean Energy Force Workforce Development. PCEF's priority is to create green jobs, fund improvements to homes through renewable energy and energy efficient investments, and support local businesses. These are some numbers from their the first cycle and the forthcoming cycle. The first cycle, there were 16 projects with a total of $3 million in funding going out the door. The next funding cycle, which this is hot off the press, I just got this information yesterday, they're going to be funding 12 projects with a total of $26 million in funding. And that funding is based off of a 20 to 25% requirement. So depending on how the total fund fluctuates, that should be about where it is going forward. And within that fund, priority populations for workforce and contractor development projects are looked for: women, people of color, people with disabilities, and people who are chronically underemployed. Their goal is to developing a diverse and well-trained workforce and contractor pool in the clean energy field. And that requires teaching these populations and addressing the barriers that have prevented their full participation in this field. Next slide. So PCEF is required to set measurable and ambitious goals and to report on them. To set measurable and ambitious goals, they need to know what the supply and the demand is. That is why the team is launching a market study to recognize investment priorities, recognize demand and supply, and specifically to recognize the supply or to determine the supply of BIPOC and women workers. Next slide. And to further and continue to ensure that workforce priorities are met, just last month, PCEF created the High Road Committee. This 11-member council will provide guidance regarding a range of workforce and contracting issues and is tasked with also ensuring good wage green jobs with good working conditions are provided. And that's all from me. I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
I will stop sharing so you can share, Jeremy.
Great, thank you. So yeah, as I load up this here, my name is Jeremy Simmer, and I do research and policy work for SEIU Local 49. And one moment, please. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good. So,
oh, Jeremy, you are, oh yeah, there we go.
Great, thanks. So I'm talking about, thanks Dirk for that introduction. That was super good segue. I'm talking about our new workforce development project, new to Portland, called the Green Janitor Program. But before I get into the meat of the matter, a little bit about where we're coming from is SEIU Local 49. We're a union of about 14,000 workers in Oregon and Southwest Washington. Our members work in healthcare services and in what we call property services. So that's janitors and security officers, very often who work in the large commercial office buildings that are being contemplated to be covered by this climate and health standards policy. And our members are also very highly impacted by climate change. Our membership is disproportionately women, people of color, and immigrants. Within the janitors who clean commercial real estate overwhelmingly fall into one or more of the categories that Dirk just mentioned of PCEF priority categories, including people of color, people with low incomes, people with disabilities. So we have a lot, we're very invested in working for climate justice and partnering on this policy. We're part of a larger Service Employees International Union, which across US, Canada, and Puerto Rico has about 2 million members. And in addition to the industries I mentioned a moment ago, also works in public services. SEIU was the first national union to endorse the Green New Deal And we actively are partnering with environmental and environmental justice organizations to win new bold legislation at the federal and state and local level. We bargain with employers to write into union contracts improvements for sustainability issues, and we train our members on sustainable workplace practices. The main example of that is the Green Janitor program. So this started some years ago out of a conversation between SEIU and the U.S. Green Building Council. How can we work together, as building owners and the workers who clean those buildings to create climate justice? The project was launched, it was piloted by two of the largest SEIU locals in the US, in New York and California, with significant input from building owners and property managers and building engineers, and of course, janitors themselves, who know commercial real estate and know buildings generally, sometimes better than anyone, because they know every single corner of every single building that they have to clean and take care of. So what is this training? The curriculum, it's a 30-hour course. It's certified by the US Green Building Council, and it has 6 modules on an introduction to LEED concepts, energy and water efficiency, recycling and waste stream management, health and safety to protect janitors themselves and the other people they work with, and finally green cleaning practices, such as choosing cleaning chemicals, for example, that have less of an environmental impact. The benefits have been proven that the U.S. Green Building Council, the chapter in LA, has called the pilot and the program that has really taken off in California as being the least expensive and easiest method to reduce energy and water usage. So kind of like the low-hanging fruit that Vin or Dirk mentioned a few minutes ago. There was it was launched in Los Angeles around 2016, I think it was, and a research paper on it after the initial startup showed that buildings participating in the Green Janitor education program used 5.6% less energy than other comparable buildings. Another benefit for building owners is that it adds a point toward applications for LEED certification. But it's also really good for janitors. I mean, it builds new skills. It provides a green janitor certification that is portable to other jobs. The training that they receive, these 30 hours, they're on the clock and at the work site. So it's not something that's, foisted in addition. Janitors work really hard, long, it's difficult work, long hours, usually late at night. And so this is not sort of giving them something else to do, but it's actually incorporated into their work on the work site. This is thanks to the partnerships with high road employers who want to and have a demonstrated commitment to investing in quality jobs and energy efficiency. But it also, the other thing that's a pleasant surprise is it's been shown to have a positive ripple effect in janitors' homes and communities. Many participants in California and now here in Portland, they say, I didn't know about this stuff. I didn't understand how important it was to conserve energy and the impact on carbon emissions. So I'm actually unplugging appliances at my house, and I'm telling my family to do the same so that we can reduce our energy consumption. So after this successful, startup in California, over 1,000 janitors have graduated from the program in California in recent years. We just launched last year in Portland for the first time. We were an inaugural grantee for the Portland Clean Energy Fund that Dirk was describing. So far, we have 31 graduates who clean for buildings owned by Unico and American Assets Trust. And they work for two of the multiple janitorial companies where our members work are ABM and Able. Those 4 companies are our main partners so far in Portland, but we are looking for others. Meanwhile, there are pilots going on in Denver, Minneapolis, Chicago, and Seattle. So we're really working to scale this up around the country. And finally, I wanted to share, this video is about 1.5 minutes. I'm just going to show you a short clip that includes a quote from one of our members about her experiences. If you don't understand Spanish, read the subtitles at the bottom. I'm going to jump right out to here, to Norma.
Example for Earth Day.
Como vamos a las clases, ya voy dando cuenta que lo que están básicamente enseñándonos es la forma mejor de continuar haciendo nuestro trabajo, pero más saludable. Es bueno para la salud, bueno para el medio ambiente, es una forma de, como decimos nosotros, ¿no? Con mis hijas, hacer el mundo más limpio.
As we think about the celebrations.
So I want to stop sharing my screen here. That's it. As you heard from Norma there, you know, that she talked about the, sorry, stop share. As she mentioned, you know, this she talked about the new skills that she learned and how she's taken it and shared it with her family and gone beyond just her workplace. So that's a quick summary. I will send a PDF version of this for your review afterward, and when appropriate, would love to hear any comments or questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Very inspiring, and I hope the program takes off here. Next up is James. Let's keep the thread on BIPOC community going here.
All right, can everybody see my screen and hear me?
I hear you. I can see your screen too.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is James Matoir. I'm the Workforce Development Training Manager at Earth Advantage. For those that don't know, Earth Advantage is a nonprofit, and our mission is to provide knowledge to building professionals and information to consumers through certification, research, and education, along with software development to accelerate the overall building industry's adoption of sustainable construction practices. We want to make sure that we are training not only veterans that have been in the industry, or vets, if you will, people who are seasoned in the construction industry, but also those new young professionals that are getting into the industry overall. So today we'll be talking about specifically our work in the workforce development training program that we work with at Earth Advantage. We have our Green Building Training certification program where we work with local pre-apprenticeship training programs here in the Portland metro area, as well as offer this to other youth training programs across the state. And, you know, when we're delivering this training, we're really specifically teaching students how to, we're focusing on how to build right the first time. In essence, making sure that they are exposed to not just the way it's been done, but how it should be done, and making sure that those students understand the concepts of building it right the first time if they're getting into new construction. But as we're seeing with our conversations here, there's a real importance for students to learn how to go in and deal with existing homes and make them more energy efficient and healthier as well. So we focus on that aspect as well. And so we focus really on the 5 pillars of health, land, water, materials, and energy, and how those all interplay with each other, and how that is important to know how those interplay with each other when they're building these homes. We also talk about building science and using the house as a system approach. Historically in the construction industry, things have been kind of done from an ad hoc perspective, and this can be detrimental when you're coming in and making different retrofits, and there's a need for process to be done using building science to make sure that doing something on one side of the home is going to be done in a way to where it keeps the house healthy, but more importantly, keeps the occupants of that building healthy as well. This training also is really focusing, if you're thinking about, you know, the Portland Clean Energy Fund and the work that needs to be done, aligning with energy codes, as energy codes are constantly changing every 3 years, the housing market and the overall just need of young professionals coming into the industry. This is going to be a look at some of the pre-apprenticeship training programs we work with, and these are predominantly working with BIPOC, low-income, returning home citizens, and historically underrepresented communities in the construction industry. and really getting those students engaged and wanting to find and getting excited about career paths into the green building existing home construction market. We come in with our training to talk about the 5 pillars as well as different career pathways into these programs, already multi-week program. They're really offering students a wide array of just kind of like an introduction and really getting students geared toward for the construction industry, making sure, you know, what is it like to show up with your tools, showing up on time, having that right attitude, and also helping them with a lot of wraparound services, which we'll get into a little bit later. This is us out on site with one of our partners, Habitat for Humanity. This is really good. We get a lot of great feedback from the students as they get out on site. They're able to ask questions and really understand how a home is put together. One of the great things about Habitat for Humanity is we really kind of stress the fact and let them know that building a green home is doesn't just mean it has to be very expensive. Habitat for Humanity is building very energy efficient, healthy homes on a budget, and really making that apparent for these students as they get into the industry. It doesn't always cost more, or doesn't always have to be more expensive. Part of the lessons that we have learned is that we came in to really give an introduction to green construction, and what we learned is that it's just an intro and it wasn't enough. And so we really needed to define more career pathways, and what does that ladder look like stepping up to then understand what are the career pathways into the industry overall. One of the things that we at Earth Advantage have done is worked with different contractors and started to do some surveys and interviews and really assess what does the industry need. And we're looking at, well, not only do we need people to do the work, but we also need to have people who are trained on how to assess homes accurately. And so we created some pathways into the industry, where we can kind of define those career pathways. Looking at the role, looking at salaries, looking at the specific trainings and credentials, and what is the job growth for these students to get into the industry. One of the things that we've come across is understanding that in the residential sector, there has historically not been a clear pathway. And that is what we've been trying to do, is create more of these career pathways and a step ladder to give guidance to students to understand that, yes, you can get into construction, but did you understand there's this whole industry regarding energy efficiency and healthy homes? And a lot of students just don't know that, and we're trying to expose them to these career pathways. So we teach them about the different certifications and hopefully get them involved and taking those certifications as they move up in the industry. Part of also lessons learned as well is once that student is engaged, it really works well with the pre-apprenticeship training programs that we're working with, because they offer wraparound services, but we're also offering career coaching. So if that student has a specific career pathway that they're interested in, we'll have a one-on-one mentoring session with them. We'll go out in the field with them, let them job shadow with us for one day. That way they can ask us questions, potentially ask the builder on site or the site super on questions. We pay them stipends for their time to take scholarships that we offer them, offer internships, and really make those employer connections. We recently just, with the Energy Trust of Oregon and the Home Builder Association, hosted a Build Right session where we brought together employers and workforce training students, and really getting that networking and a meet and greet to get contractors and students talking with each other. And we had a great response, and some of those contractors were like, wow, I didn't even know that these groups existed. And so it's really just about making that connection. You have a labor shortage, well, here we are. We have these students that are ready to get into the industry. And so just making sure we're bolstering those connections there. We talked about the pre-apprenticeship training programs, but one of the things we really like to let the builders know is that these programs offer these wraparound services. So potentially when you're hiring one of these students, you're potentially getting a student that might have access to resume writing, have access to childcare services, have access to bus passes and transportation, have access to funding to buy their own tools. This is a great resource. If you're hiring one of these students, they have access to this. And so this is really important for those employers to know that not only are they just getting a student that has some training, but they are hiring someone that actually has these wraparound services or has access to these services as well. This brings me to one of the important parts of as the Portland Clean Energy Fund grows, and as we have been talking with contractors, it's really about building this collaborative effort of bringing all of the stakeholders together. And so we have workforce development training programs where students are coming out, they're graduating, they're getting into the industry that are then potentially going to get hired by these contractors, minority and women-owned businesses, to then help the community-based organizations and homeowners. So when you tell a contractor, hey, where's the money from PSEF? How are we going to do this? Well, when you have a grant that says, hey, we're going to do X amount of homes to then be working with a contractor that's going to hire X amount of workforce development training students, that's it. You have the students, you have the contractors, and you have the overall benefit to the homeowners and the tenants. And so I like to think of this as that circle, if you will, to get the work done, and thinking about it in a collaborative effort in this way. And last but not least, I know I'm running short on time. Dirk mentioned that we are working with the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and part of the work that we're doing right now is we're completing a grant that was for a gap analysis with Constructing Hope. And this planning grant is aimed to understand the current options for green construction training available to PSEF priority populations with the following goals: assess employment opportunities, training needs, and credentialing needed in residential and commercial green construction and energy efficiency, engage stakeholders in the planning process, and produce recommendations for career pathway training, certifications, and credentials. And lastly, I'll just say, as you can see from that last slide, it's really about this last slide here, or this last bullet, the importance of the partnerships and the expertise, bringing all of those relationships and stakeholders together. So with that, I'll turn it back over, I think, to Vin.
Thank you, James. Much like even more inspiration. I have not seen this presentation yet, and I love the work that you're doing for residential. And those lessons learned will certainly be applicable to multifamily, residential, and commercial buildings too. I really like that holistic approach, and that's how we approach the HART standards too. Is not just looking at energy or carbon emissions, but really like the other intersecting issues, and especially the wraparound services. Very cool. I have two teenagers, and the last couple of years have been rough, and I just wanted to take a minute to note that in kind of what seems like a bleak world sometimes, I love the name Constructing Hope, because it's bringing hope to what do we do about things like climate change, but in terms of being resilient and also stopping the impacts of climate change from getting worse. And here we are working on these solutions, and thank you for the whole group to working on these solutions together. I think there's a lot of hope out there for our future generations as they enter into the workforce if we have programs like this. All right, well, I'll turn it over to Rain Feast for one last bit of inspiration before I take a break.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rain Feast Giantino Viatoro, and I'm with Blue Green Alliance. So we're just a national organization founded between the United Steelworkers and Sierra Club, aimed to address our environmental challenges while creating good quality jobs. So I'm about to do sort of a set of slides here on just what we believe are high road approaches in the commercial and multifamily space. So let me see if I can do a screen share. And hopefully folks can see that. So high road careers in buildings. So what do we mean by high road? So I provided a definition of high roads. We borrowed this from UC Berkeley. They did a study titled Putting California on the High Road Map on Clean Energy. And their sort of definition here is optimizing climate policy outcomes while supporting the creation of and access to supported family, supporting jobs is a high road approach for economic development. As a term.
Excuse me, Renfis. Could you put that into presenter mode? I have bad eyes and it's hard for me to read this.
Sure. My apologies. Going too quickly here. Thanks. Hopefully this pops up.
Does that work? Much better. Thank you.
Awesome. So again, high road definition as the term is used here is a high road economy that supports businesses that compete on the basis of the quality of their products and services by investing in their workforces. These businesses pay the wages and benefits necessary to attract and retain skilled workers who in turn perform high quality work. Building the high road requires interventions on both the demand side and the supply side of the labor market. Supply indicates workers and institutions that train them. Demand refers to workers in the firms or institutions that offer them. So as I share these slides, you'll see the citations on the notes. So I think there's a lot to dig in there. I'm going to keep it top level rather than going to the weeds, but just some recommendations for commercial and multifamilies in terms of meeting that definition is require contractors to be training agents with apprenticeship programs, mainly those registered to the state of Oregon, so Boley of Labor and Industries, through their state apprenticeship and training councils. Require contractors for the utilization of apprenticeship. So set goals. Make sure that they're every contractor working on here is training their workforce. So apprenticeship programs have historically been privately funded and have existed for over 100 years. And we can continue to ensure that those programs are privately funded by setting key requirements. Promote apprenticeship programs with track records of diverse recruitment, retention, and graduation of diverse workers. So I'll come back to this piece in a bit, but I'll just note here that not every apprenticeship program performs the same way. There are key programs that have higher graduation rates, higher retention rates for diverse workers, and where and when possible, we as policymakers need to be aware of that and promote that to the best extent possible if you want diverse workers to be benefiting from policies such as this. Additionally, set utilization goals for women, BIPOC workers per trade. So just because we're utilizing apprentices does not mean we'll be utilizing diverse workers. In turn, we can utilize pre-apprentices. So as James earlier noted, institutions like Oregon Tradeswomen, Portland Youth Builders, Constructing Hope, they all have entryways into union and non-union apprenticeship programs after they graduate. Additionally, require prevailing wages. So ensuring that workers are being paid competitive wages within their sector, and where possible, require health and retirement benefits. So I'm gonna be honest, construction work is heavy work, and you're exposed to all sorts of safety hazards, whether you're setting lighting or a ventilation system, or have to use a ladder. Like, it's really important that we're thinking about health and retirement benefits. Additionally, where possible, ensure that commercial and multifamily construction is including community benefit agreements. So how do we ensure the benefits are reaching the intended beneficiaries, not only on the tenants or the communities that are receiving the benefits, but also on the workforce side? And where possible, promote union jobs. So again, there are very few advocates for workers or workers who are experiencing harm in the workplace. Unions are oftentimes the frontline advocate to ensuring workers are being protected on the work site. But why high road? So why these recommendations? I think we should be all clear-eyed about this industry. So the construction industry faces rampant wage theft, faces harassment. So I've included some citations here from the Oregon Center for Public Policy, as well as a thesis out of PSU that diverse workers are facing the most amount of harm when it comes to wage theft and harassment. I know there's some folks here from the city of Portland. pulled some data back in 2019, which City of Portland in its procurement and its construction projects, I'll note, had seen violations out of ballpark $200,000 worth of wage theft violations. That, I'll say, is just the tip of the iceberg on violations, but it's supposed to exemplify even on public projects, we see wage theft. And I'll note, we'll likely see more wage theft in the private sector than in the public sector. Additionally, workforce training is critical to workplace safety. So go again back to recommendations. Whether you're an electrician or a plumber, whatever your trade is, your training is important to ensure a safe workplace. So again, we're wiring, operating heavy specialized equipment or moving heavy items. It's important that you're getting the training and that you actually have folks on site to provide those supports, especially if this is the first time in the work site. Additionally, skilled training leads to greenhouse gas reductions. So a study out of UC Berkeley, again, will be in the citations, is they've made a direct correlation between quality training, whether it's an apprenticeship program or certification, to quality installation. And as we can all speak, quality installation has a huge impact on true energy savings. And I'm going to work on this premise. We'll have good health and other environmental outcomes with whatever program you're thinking of. I think we can all agree a quality installation maximizes the true benefits from those installations. Additionally, with these recommendations, is emphasis on jobs versus careers. We want to make sure the jobs that we're getting folks into, especially if we're setting key goals for women and BIPOC workers, is that these are not just one-time jobs, but a career, whether they're working one day on a building one season and the next season they're working on utility scale solar. We got to make sure that these jobs are careers, fulfilling careers, and that we're actually seeing them being retained in the industry. But lastly, all these recommendations come together to make sure that we're leveling the playing field for contractors to do the high road. So we have contractors right now who are doing the right thing, others who are not. I'm not going to get on my soapbox and say, who's great or who's not great, but I think they're all operating in a market, in reality, that they're in a market where it's promoting the lowest cost. And so, policy intervention is required to ensure that contractors aren't thinking about lowest cost and winning the bid. They're thinking about the best value. And that, I think, intersects when we think about health, environmental, and other community benefits. Like, how do we maximize those general benefits? My apologies on the background noises here. And I think I'll just end here on my bias is just union apprenticeship programs. So we highlighted this earlier, but they are governed by a joint apprenticeship training council that includes worker and employer representatives. They are earn as you learn program that combines classroom instruction with on-the-job training. Apprentices are generally paid a percentage of what a journey level worker is compensated, and that increases over time as they complete their apprenticeship hours. These workers are oftentimes hired via hiring hall. So again, they're not dependent on one employer, but multiple employers, which helps promote and ensure retention in the industry. And as workers who graduate the program, they become journey level workers. So they can seek work not only in the state of Oregon, but oftentimes this journey level license allows them to work anywhere on any project across the country. Just an example, just benefits again. So you can go through a licensed electrician program through IBW. You can work on rooftop solar one day on a residential or multifamily project, and then work on utility scale solar. So just kind of noting there's kind of limitations on, like, say, your limited renewable technician license and other programs. So I think did a lot. That's it. I wanted to show at least, see if I can show some data just about workforce diversity.
While you're pulling that up, we have just a couple minutes before we go into a short break. And so I wanted to, first of all, say thank you so much to the 5 folks who you just heard present a whole lot of information on workforce development. And I'm sticking a couple of questions into the chat, and welcome your input via the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and offer some thoughts, but 2 questions for you all. We wanted to get your take on the workforce development examples you just heard. So first of all, is there anything that you just heard that you found particularly inspiring? Or I think Vin used the word hope or hopeful earlier. Was there anything that inspired you with hope about the potential of increasing access to good, high quality, safe jobs? And then also, are there other examples, right, that would feel at home with those 3 things that our speakers just talked about? 2 job training programs, and then the Green Janitor program. Are there other things that you think the city of Portland should be aware of? Really great examples that you're familiar with of the way in which we can train people and provide an access point into good jobs. So open up the floor, welcome comments by chat, and looking also for hand raises. Great. Michael, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I found it all, I guess, as a parent of kids who are getting older and looking out into the world and kind of wondering what they're going to do next, and knowing, having grown up in poverty, personally, I had more, I guess, less opportunity to get my mind around what jobs are available than maybe my kids have. So recognizing there's other people in the community who don't have a lot of guidance. Anytime I hear about programs that are helping kids figure out what to do next and giving them an opportunity to do something other than work in fast food, for example, I find terribly inspiring. I guess I was just curious, having, someone who voted for the PCEF program when when the measure was put forward. Are the PCEF dollars, did I hear correctly that some of those PCEF dollars are being put to these programs, or did I mishear that? They are?
That sounds like a question for Vin or Dirk, perhaps.
Yes, that is correct. And
Okay.
James can elaborate on his, or Jeremy, you can elaborate on yours if you want.
Yeah, so as far as some of the PCEF funding, they are funding us to do some of this training with the top 4 pre-apprenticeship training programs, Portland Youth Builders, POIC, Constructing Hope, and Oregon Tradeswomen.
And I want to call another question that came in through the chat along those lines of kind of intersections. A question from Adele: how do PCC, which I believe would be Portland Community College, how do community college programs interact with some of these? So do any of you have a relationship with the community colleges, work with them? Or maybe is that kind of a area of potential opportunity?
I think there's going to be more opportunities there, especially as there will be more opportunities for students to graduate and get into this field. I currently teach the Sustainable Construction Practices class at PCC, and so there's just it's just a different level of student coming out of the community college versus the pre-apprenticeship training program students that are coming in. Whereas you might have students from different levels of project management, actually hands-on, or more of a design build, versus just kind of coming in as really just maybe what is that entry point, or with just a little bit of knowledge.
Thanks, James. So I see there already is an overlap, right, in your work personally, at least. And I think, that really dovetails to a comment that Anjanette just put in the chat, which is the importance of encouraging these intersections and making sure that students who are coming out of middle school and high schools are aware that there are opportunities here for them. Thumbs up. I see support for that. We have a couple of hands up. I want to know, Vin, are you okay if we just go a couple more minutes? We're I'm not taking time away from your break, but we're pushing your break off a little bit. But I'd love to just hear a couple other comments. I think it's very helpful. Okay with that?
Yeah, 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Okay, great. Wendy Gibson, you have your hand up, so I'd love to just maybe 30 seconds from you, and then on Jeanette.
Yeah, totally. Mine can be really quick. Just the recognition that Energy Trust of Oregon is currently exploring ways to do workforce development around energy efficiency in K through 12, specifically focusing on commercial, but residential as well. Our focus is really on working with organizations already doing this work or identifying a gap where something's not being done. This is both in Portland and regionally as well. So if anybody's interested in talking to us, have any ideas, we'd love to hear more because we are starting to look at this. Anyways, that's a plug around like just partnering and trying to look for opportunities as well.
Thanks. And Wendy, I don't know would you want to drop your email or the right contact information in the chat? And then if somebody wants to talk to Energy Trust further about it, you'll have that information there. Thank you. Jeanette, go ahead.
Yeah, so I did a lot of work, most of my work is in this field, and so I just wanted to add that I think it would be helpful, especially on a larger scale, if parents and students alike were made aware that a lot of the apprenticeships are connected with the community college, and you receive credits for completing those apprenticeships. So say the electrician's apprenticeship is a longer program, but when you finish that program, you will have an associate's degree. And so you will be getting paid and you'll be getting job experience, and you also will get that degree that you was going to go to college to get anyway, all at the same time. So I think when we push things that like are very beneficial, that folks will kind of ease their mind and really take advantage of these programs in which we will be needing them because of the job shortage.
Thanks, Anjana. And I think I just want to lift up a couple of things that you just mentioned, and I think that I heard in the earlier presentations as well, which is the importance of compensating folks who are getting trained. So I think it was learn to earn. I'm not sure which way it goes. And I think, Anjana, your comment about also making sure that there is a degree or some kind of like terminus that folks receive after the end of those programs that they take with them is also very important. Ranfis, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to ask if you could just put your thoughts into the chat. I want to make sure everybody has a little bit of break before we come back for the second half of our content for today on resource hubs. So I will dismiss you all for 5 minutes. Please come back at 1:41. 1:41, we will start again promptly. See you all soon. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I can't see you, but I'm going to have faith that you all are out there and ready to get started. So we are about to launch into the second major content piece of our agenda today on resource hubs. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Vinh and Zach to talk about what is happening in some other cities. And then we're going to follow their presentation with some small group discussions. So Vinh or Zach, whichever you would like to take the floor.
I can take it, Marty.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach.
So what we're going to do here is give an overview of resource hubs, also sometimes called high performance building hubs. These are organizations that are set up expressly to support the implementation of building performance standards. So you can think of them as sort of like a centralized help service for building owners, but also for the professional services, the people doing the work in buildings to understand what the building performance standard is, what its requirements are, what that means for the different buildings, and most importantly, what strategies can they pursue to meet the requirements, what resources are there to help them. So on this slide, you can see these are common services that the existing building resource hubs are offering in support of performance standard policies. Technical assistance, especially for under-resourced buildings, is kind of a popular service that we're seeing, and one that I think more and more cities are going to be trying to really target their technical services to the under-resourced buildings. Contractor and vendor matchmaking services. This can look like helping buildings find engineering services, construction contractors that are well-versed in building performance that can help them meet their goals. Financing and funding, matchmaking services, databases, things like that are really big. So for example, in Washington, DC, there's a lot of work connecting building owners to available incentives and other kind of financing opportunities to pay for building upgrades. Trainings, case studies, building efficiency resources is just kind of a general category. So that could look like, briefings on new technologies that building owners might consider. It could look like best practices on energy management, things like that. So kind of a catch-all category. And then performance-based leasing, also sometimes known as green leasing. Excuse me. So this is contract language that building owners can use in lease negotiations with tenants to align incentives so that all parties are trying to reduce energy use, reduce carbon emissions from the buildings, and pursue any other building performance goals that the owner and tenant have, which so in terms of building performance standard, could look like carbon reductions, could look like energy reductions, could look like indoor air quality improvements, things like that. Next slide, please, Vinh. So I've got a chart here, and on the next slide with high-level information about the existing resource hubs that we know about. Now, there are some other hubs that are not tied to building performance standards. I'm not covering those. These are just the hubs that are associated with, or that are in cities that have building performance standards. So the first two, Boston and Denver, are not operational yet. Both those cities just adopted their performance standards in the last year. However, they are going to have hubs in support of the policies. In Boston, they'll be supplying building efficiency resources, compiling a database of different financing opportunities available in the region. They'll be doing trainings to try to spread the word about the policy and help the building owners and also the professional community kind of gear up to meet the goals of the policy. And this is a Boston, at this point, a Boston funded effort. And it's operated by the City of Boston's Environment Department. In Denver, they're really emphasizing support for under-resourced buildings. They want to do a vendor matchmaking service, so connecting different equipment installers and vendors with building owners. Financing database as well, the big emphasis on green leasing that Denver's had for many years. Again, funding is being supplied by Denver right now and run through the city. Washington, D.C. has the oldest building resource hub that was created to support a performance standard law. And that hub is actually operated by my organization, IMT. We have a couple of employees running that hub. Funding from it is mostly from the city, but there's also some local utility funding and a corporate membership program that offsets some of the budget there. Like the other hubs, a lot of work convening stakeholders, kind of supplementing the city's efforts to notify building owners of the performance standard, and then a lot of outreach to contractors, engineering firms, architects on what the policy means, and helping resource them to work with building owners more effectively to achieve the goals of the policy. Green leasing and lots of events going on there. And you can look actually at the Building Innovation Hub, that's the name of DC's hub, to see in their website some more detailed descriptions of the kind of services that they're offering. Next slide, please. And just to finish it up, New York City has a hub called the Building Energy Exchange. It's operated by a nonprofit organization created for the purpose called BEX, short for Building Energy Exchange. They are funded mostly by city and state funds, but they also have a corporate membership program like DC that accounts for about 25% of their budget. And then obviously New York City is a huge city. There are tons of buildings under its building performance standards, so they're heavily staffed. They've got 10 people working on their hub. And then lastly, St. Louis, Missouri has a 3-person hub, which is operated by the local USGBC chapter, which has been a long-term partner to the city on sustainability efforts, especially around buildings and energy use. And the St. Louis hub was launched with philanthropic money to kind of seed the development of the hub that still provides almost half of the funding. But St. Louis also got pretty generous support from their local electric utility, and they've had a mix of support from university, their gas utility, and then the Natural Resources Defense Council has provided a little bit of support as well.
Thank you, Zach. I wanted to ask a question. Maybe we can field a question or two right now to Marty. Just on the presentation before we go into our small group breakouts. So what do you mean by corporate memberships?
So it's essentially a sponsorship. They can sponsor training events. So some of the larger construction firms in the area, sponsorship that allows the hub to put on trainings or run staff. So it's kind of a way of the corporate sponsor to say, hey, we're behind the goals of this and we want to make sure that that this runs. So there's kind of a brand benefits for them in doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Very cool. Well, I wanted to share just one other thought here before we open it up for a couple questions and go into small group discussion. And let's see. So in other cities with building performance standards, they have an energy and carbon focus as the main goal of decarbonization over time to meet their climate goals. And in Portland, we really focused not just on decarbonization, but also advancing racial equity right from the start. So that resulted in really hearing, I think, a lot from tenant needs through the Build Shift community convening. So I wanted to share some of the ideas I think intersect with resource hubs as a potential solution. We shared this earlier, but I wanted to revisit it for a minute here, is that more energy assistance is needed for low-income folks that are energy burdened and to help pay their utility bills. And so in some cases, it's just increasing the access, so more access to energy assistance, but also more dollars. So the resource hub could be a way to really be a central location where folks know to get where to get energy assistance and how to navigate that system. And then similarly, if we were to have building energy information that's informing tenants before they move into a space about some of the health or temperature standards that are there, and as well as the energy costs, the potential energy costs that we had talked about within our earlier groups, that could be a place where folks would know, like, oh, that's where I can go and get my information as a tenant to make an informed decision before I sign a lease, and what those winter heating bills might be, or the overall costs on an annual basis. And then lastly here, but not leastly, is discomfort with landlord interaction. And this was something that I heard throughout the build shift process over 2 years, is a lot of fear of retaliation if someone were to complain to their landlord. Example of that I remember from one of our convenings was somebody who had a door that was no longer closed properly. And so they did point out, well, the heat and exits their home pretty easily through that door. The gap that was left behind, a significant gap, but also as a safety issue for them. And they really felt like they couldn't bring that to their landlord, because if they did, the landlord might use that as a reason to evict them or raise their rent. So we heard many stories like that, and just wanted to check in with Build Shift community that's here today if you wanted to share a story as well. Here's one other chart, and just kind of our survey of folks that participated in an energy cost burden workshop, that nearly half didn't feel comfortable talking to their landlords. So that gives you a sense for where the extent of that discomfort. Yeah, so anybody from Build Shift want to share a story? More convenience? And are there any questions too? Marty, do you want to take it from here with questions as well?
Sure. Yes. Anybody, if you have clarifying questions or things that you think are important to add, please go ahead, and you can do that by raising your hand or putting something in the chat. And I wanted to just call out a couple of comments that came in through the chat. A suggestion about NIA's Better Bricks program, which has been in effect for multiple decades, I want to say, being potentially a source or support for this idea of providing resources to covered building owners. And we also had a question, and maybe this is for Zach. Do you know if the utility funding in St. Louis is passed on to the ratepayers?
That's a great question. I don't know the details of the utility funding in St. Louis, though. I'm sorry.
This is Cliff Majerzik from IMT. The utilities in St. Louis do get cost recovery for their programs. So ultimately, it is, in the broader sense, passed through to ratepayers. But I think some of it comes out of marketing budgets as well.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. And it sounds like, thanks, Dave. Emily from NIA responding to David about NIA, and it sounds like NIA is also supporting the compliance work that is happening in Washington State, and specifically in Seattle, and would be prepared to do something similar for Portland building owners as well. So I think that's a great resource for everybody to be aware of. Any last questions before we talk a little bit about our ground rules and then introduce the questions for discussion? This is your chance. Going once. Okay, Vin, do you want to go ahead and remind everybody of the ground rules for our conversation?
Yeah, I know that we only have about 15 minutes left for conversation in our breakout rooms, but with these two groups coming together and some of us not having worked together in these spaces yet, I wanted to review this fairly quickly. So the first, these are the ground rules that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability uses. So the first being listen to understand, not respond. And wait, why am I talking? Similarly, you can think of it as why am I not talking? Because we do want to hear from everyone in our small group breakouts. Assume good intentions, but attend to impact. So even if you didn't intend for it to cause harm, really look at the harm that was caused, and not say like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Be willing to make mistakes though, and be forgiving to those who do. Allow for and appreciate disagreement of opinion, ideas, and methods, and appreciate if that's done respectfully. And then personal stories stay, lessons can be learned. We want this to be a safe space, but take those lessons back to your respective organizations. And lastly, we have a fill in the blank, and I would like to just say to make space for all to be heard, kind of going back to that rule number 2. if you're the type of person who likes to speak a lot, like I am, an open processor, try to make a little more space for others. We'll have about 1 or 2 minutes to hear from each of you on these questions. The first question, especially want to hear from everyone. The second question is more optional.
Thanks, Vin. And you're going to see those questions come up now. And I've also put them into the chat, and those will stay with you as you go into your small groups. And really what we are looking to have a conversation about here is your ideas about how a resource hub in Portland could support all of the folks who are going to be affected by this potential policy. We have kind of 2 sub-questions for you. So I think without further ado, Vin, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, we're down to about 14 minutes in our small groups.
Let's break out.
Okay, great. Wing, would you open those rooms? And we'll see you all back.
Hi, Wing. Sorry I kept going in and out. I'm on the move right now from a community event.
Gotcha, Julian. It's not a problem. You want to go back in a particular room?
Just wherever is fine. I think you sent me to group 2 or something, and then I got jumped out of it. Sorry about that. Thank you again.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'll put you back in room 2.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Hey everyone, welcome back from small groups. We're going to, following our tradition of doing a quick report out from each of the group facilitators so we can all hear what was talked about in all of the other groups. Believe everybody is back with us. So I'd like to ask first, Michelle, would you give us a quick recap of your group?
Sure. So we had a really great group that started out being focused on a location of a hub, curiosity about where this place would be, where it would be housed, the importance of having being able to have a hub and spoke system, so multiple access points. Someone referenced the green building hotline that the City of Portland Bureau of Sustainability used to run, which was a place that you could get technical expertise, access to resources, and a one-stop concept. Talking again about location, we started going down the path of realizing that if it was location you had to drive to, that would maybe create difficulties or barriers to access for people. And then a very important comment towards the end where we should consider separating out the support and compliance piece, regulatory piece, from the complaint piece. In other words, those are two separate functions, and this idea that renters may need, a level of confidentiality that someone seeking resources would not need. And that's it.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was busy typing away all the really important things that you shared. Thank you with that. Dirk, how about you? Let's hear what your group talked about.
Sure, I was busy finishing notes too. Yeah, so my group, I think to the first question, the resource hubs should allow other tenants to be able to collaborate or know how to collaborate on those resource hubs. Knowledge sharing that is accessible for tenants, like our meeting here. Some things are kind of high level and hard to understand, so more layman. So owners need to know where to start as well. So financing, resources, case studies within that, learn from other examples, understanding what the requirements are for owners. And then on question 2, there was a point that was a good one. I think that there was a good argument made for the city not running it. Owners and tenants alike might feel more comfortable if an outside agency or an outside nonprofit is running it. And then lastly, whoever staffs those resource hubs should have some equity considerations taken to them, or if they're represented people within those resource hubs. And that could even be, those resource hubs could even be guided by an outside group of folks, kind of like maybe what the Build Shift folks would guide, something like that. So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dirk. Andrea, can we hear what your group talked about?
Sure. For the first question, we heard about the idea of meeting building owners where they're at in their building life cycle. That's a very powerful concept, and helping them understand the pathways to compliance, a lot more education on the metrics, whatever those end up being. They will need help. We heard that tenants need some guidance on how to talk to landlords about these building programs and improvements. A really good idea about for tenants, like looking at some existing tenant education curricula that already exists and integrating into that rather than building something new, which I think a lot of folks kind of thumbed up. And then an idea that convening in physical space and place is actually really powerful and helpful. So some suggestions for actually a physical component to this idea of a hub. And another idea was to establish cohorts of building owners or managers to go through this together, which I think is happening up in Washington, and taking groups through rather than everyone being individual. I thought that was a great idea. And then on question, is it just question 1 or question 2 as well?
Both, please.
Okay. This one, our group didn't. A lot of folks were like, "Oh, I don't have a strong preference," or "I sort of see pros and cons to each," or a hybrid. There was definitely not a strong like, "Yes, the city should," or "No, the city shouldn't." A lot of people really like the idea of the city working in partnership with other partners, and also a thought about a hub will be hard to fund privately, like from just participation dues or membership funds. So some cobbling together of public and private resources are probably necessary.
Thank you, Andrea. Vin, let's hear about your group.
Yeah, a lot of what we talked about was already said. I love that usually I'm the first person to go. I like being at the end for a change. Yeah, so one thing I'll highlight is on that idea of there's already existing programs out there in a hub and spoke model. We talked about that. For instance, the Latino Network has already, it works on energy assistance and other programs that be more about getting the information to share out. And so the hub could be a place to share to a network that then is more connected to community for the tenant side. And then on the, there was a point made that commercial probably needs a different type of service. So that might look like something to help people pay, to figure out how they can pay for this and the availability of grants that are out there. And then there is another tool that exists already called Better Bricks, so leveraging that tool. I think that is about it that has not already been said, but anything else that folks want to point out? Oh, there is one more idea that came right at the end, is to partner with the Housing Bureau because they already have a robust landlord and tenant program. And I think that was referring to the rental services office that formed.
Great, thank you, Vin. Irene, how about you?
Yeah, so for the first question, in terms of the tenant side, that really centralizing information is really important. So, and not just on climate issues or energy efficiency resources, but on rental information, on basically centralizing all information that might be relevant to tenants in a single place, because it's usually scattered in lots of different places. And then also that the Resource Center might not be as well equipped to help large kind of campus improvements and things like that. So there's some ideas about if a resource hub can be scaled to to provide information and resources for different types of construction and buildings and things like that. So those are some ideas for question 1. And then question 2, that it's might be better for a resource hub to have staff that can really speak to real estate services and all of these more technical energy efficiency related things that we've been talking about. And then our group felt the same way too, that maybe a nonprofit or third party would be more comfortable for folks to kind of interact with and kind of having a neutral third party to go to for information. And then the last thing I'll just mention here is that maybe tapping into folks that have already built public trust and seeing if there's some opportunity for partnership there.
Thanks, Irene. So to speak on behalf of the group that I participated in, I would say trust was a theme for this group as well. And really, folks wanted to emphasize that whoever runs this resource hub, particularly the people who would be interacting with renters, need to have trust in the community. So to that end, we also had a question about whether or not the same organization or people would be equipped to provide resources to both, for example, the owner and operator of a large campus of buildings and tenants. And one of our members even asked, like, is this 2 resource hubs or is it 1 resource hub? So I think accommodating this really vast diversity of needs is going to be a challenge to be undertaken. And then as far as who might staff this, in addition to this idea of, the folks who staff it having that trust already in the community, there was this suggestion that I think most people agreed to have an advisory group overseeing or commenting on, or providing some type of oversight for this resource hub that could be similar, for example, to what has been done with Build Shift. So the idea that multiple parties representing multiple perspectives could oversee and provide comment on the resource hub. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody for these, what were clearly very robust discussions. And I will turn the floor over to Vinh to talk about what is coming next, post-meeting series, and where the city is headed with all of this work.
Great, thank you. That's really awesome feedback. Thank you, everyone. That last one made me think of Boston, and where they formed an equity working group that decided that they need to have an accountability, kind of community accountability board at the end. So that resonated with that idea. So we will come back and look at some of the equity considerations in other cities that we really started with. Okay, so I want to share one more time here just to wrap things up. Here we go. So next steps, let me go into presenter mode. Window. All right. Looks like I'm at the beginning again, so advance. All right, thanks for your patience. So I mentioned at the start that we have a lot to chew on and to digest. There was a high-level overview of key takeaways from our facilitators. Then the staff will work with the facilitation team to really look through all of what we heard over the last 2 months and put that into a summary. We will use that summary to update the policy concept proposal that we shared with you at the beginning. And we really learned a lot more detail here. We do want to do a bit of property owner engagement as well, and including under-resourced property owners, but also commercial and multifamily residential property owners. We're looking to their organizational leadership to tell us how to do that. And then we know that we have some additional areas that we didn't quite resolve enough to get to ordinance. So in those areas, we would like to convene maybe a 2-hour meeting, maybe a couple of 2-hour meetings over the summer with folks. And so if you're interested in these sub-bulleted areas, I will send out an email recapping our meeting or share the materials for our meeting today. And that way everybody in both groups will receive the email. And we'll want to know if you are interested in joining these additional meetings. We'd like to keep them small. We're going to have a balance of technical and lived experience expertise, as well as bringing some academic expertise from PSU. excuse me, so that's in the area of indoor air quality. We talked about a lot of options here and a lot of issues. And it's one area I want to resolve is whether or not we can actually do a performance standard versus a prescriptive standard. And then would that make more sense within Title 29, the property maintenance requirements that I shared earlier, or within the long-term trajectory of the carbon standards? Similarly for temperature limits, wanted to dive into that a little more. In the tenant working group, we had a poll of looking at temperature limits in Phoenix, Dallas, and Washington, D.C., which range from 78 degrees to, I want to say, 85 degrees. And I thought we'd land somewhere in the middle and have some discussion about the middle, but really it was on either end. So we want to look into like the other cities and how they made their decisions around that. Is that evidence-based? Is it about comfort? Is it about heat stress? Is it about mass casualty events, trying to prevent those? And as well, look into urban heat island and what can be done on buildings themselves to reduce the increase of heat, and essentially reduce air conditioning. So there's less carbon emissions when air conditioning is added as a solution, as well as heat pumps. And then the third one is rental housing unintended consequences, furthering the discussion on displacement, as well as a new idea that came up within our working group meetings, and that is concern about relocation if there are energy retrofits that end up being required that are at a scale such that folks would have to move out. Certainly not something that we would like to see happen with this policy, because our displacement is at the center of this, and I think relocation is a type of displacement. So we will have those additional focus meetings to help draft an ordinance. And then we also plan to reconvene Build Shift community. And so if you're interested in that, if you identify as BIPOC, we can connect you into the Build Shift team as we reach out again, kind of coming back from all of this engagement back to Build Shift and seeing if this is on track to meet community needs or the additional needs that are intersecting. So what does that look like? Just checking the time real quick. Yeah, I do have a couple minutes, so this is good. So we've been meeting from April to June, and there's been additional stakeholder engagement that's happening in there too, including these focus meetings I mentioned at the beginning. No, early on we asked if folks were interested, but one thing I wanted to point out for these focus meetings, these are meetings that are really intended for the folks who are actually impacted by the work versus folks that are interested in meeting with those folks. So an example of that is Native American community. We had a convening on April 7th. There's another convening tomorrow, so the beginning and the end of the stakeholder working groups. And that's really intended for folks who identify as Native American. So I know that other folks were interested in being in those meetings, but if you do identify as Native American and would like to be at the meeting tomorrow, you can follow up with me directly by email, and I'll give you the information for that. Another area is labor unions that was intended to meet with folks who represent the labor and trades within Portland. And so that meeting did happen last week. And then we were in the midst of coordinating a meeting for campus energy systems. So if that's something that you currently manage or work on policy around your hospital or university campuses, you should have already been reached out to us, but if you're not on our list, then please do let us know, and we'll add you in as that scheduling is nearing completion. So let us know today. And then regulated affordable housing, we have had an organizational focus so far. We know that there was a recommendation that came from organizations to come back to CDCs and affordable housing developers and asset managers, especially after we get some more flesh on the bones of this policy. So we're planning that out with folks towards, and I think we'll revisit before at the end of summer or right at the beginning of fall to hear some more. Similarly, local government was in this original focus meeting. I think we really want to put some more flesh on the bones again on the policy before we reach out internally to make sure we're walking the talk. So we'd like to do some of that outreach late summer, early September. And then the three focus meetings are listed here that I just covered, as well as the Build Shift reconvening. This will all feed into draft ordinance for public comment is still the plan. That's the schedule we can stay on here in early fall. And then in terms of coming to city council, there's a number of balls in the air as usual. And so we have to read politics, and then we will go to council as soon as we can. Any questions though? I wanted to leave a little room for folks just to ask questions about process before we break, because other folks might have those same questions. We have a few minutes here. Oh, and if you see anything in the chat, please let me know, Marty. I don't have the chat window open right now. Right. Well, I would like to thank everyone, and I want to make sure I cover all of my thank yous, which means that I need to see the run of show for a second for our meeting. Okay. Yeah, so of course, thank you to everyone who has participated as a stakeholder in this process. And I also wanted to specifically thank our facilitators, Marty and Irene, for holding the space, along with Wing running the logistics in the background here. It's been quite the journey, and I'm looking forward to the end. Although it's been exciting and fun, I'm also ready for summer, and it's been a lot of work. And I want to thank Dirk Larson and Andrea Jacob on my team for supporting me along the way. I needed the help, Michelle DePass, also for your help and getting the stipends out. And so if you are receiving a stipend, that's mostly Michelle running that, as well as Dirk. And so we want to make sure that you're valued for your time if you're a community-based organization here. There are other CD resources that have supported us along the way. So I want to thank our folks at the Bureau of Development Services, the Portland Housing Bureau, and Portland Bureau of Emergency Management that we meet with regularly, and I want to continue that coordination. And then also just to the Build Shift team that we spent 2 years working together, really diving into what does it look like if we decarbonize the building sector while actually benefiting those who are on the margins of the impacts of climate change and the housing affordability crisis, these dual crises that we've been living in. And it's been a pleasure, and the leadership from Verde and the Coalition of Communities of Color, as well as the cast of our team that has been so supportive. So I will call up, I usually refer to Taryn, and because Taryn does lead the work for CCC at the high level, but also Nikita Daryan Anani, who's held space for the Build Shift team weekly, where we, as we will today, this afternoon, go back and chew on what did we hear and how did it go, and helping especially make the questions accessible. A lot of wonkiness, a lot of detail, and I think we did make them accessible mostly in these meetings. So thank you. And we'll be back in touch towards the end of the month. We'll actually be back in touch right away to share meeting materials and gauge your interest in these other focus meetings. And then we'll be back in touch towards the end of the month, early July, with a summary of what we heard.
Thank you, Vin.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. Next time in person.
Yeah.